Awesome. So now that we are recording our beautiful faces, I wanted to introduce Amy Fogg, who's part of the Department of Labor. She's a mathematical statistician for the U.S. Department of Labor. Amy, her studies how accessible transportation and affordable internet access relates to the employment and health outcomes of people with disabilities. I'm very excited for this presentation. I think we're going to learn a lot from her. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amy to talk about the job outlook in accessibility. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat.
Thank you, Sam. I'll go ahead and get my screen shared. Good afternoon and good morning to everybody on the call. Okay, so how's this looking? Am I almost there? Okay.
Yep.
Great. So like Sam said, I'm going to be posing, some questions and trying to poll the people that are in the room to get a sense of who you are while I'm speaking. So I invite you to respond as I'm talking in the chat throughout my presentation. And I hope that we'll have plenty of time for more of an interactive discussion towards the end so that I can answer the specific questions that you all have, because I'm sure that my slides don't address every question that you might have about job outlook in accessibility careers. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself a little bit more. So Amy Fong, I'm an Asian American woman with long black hair and a white background today. I'm actually not at home today. I'm in Austin, Texas for a friend's wedding. So I'm couch surfing today and working from my friend's house before I go to a wedding tonight. Let's see. And yes, so I'm from the Department of Labor, the US Department of Labor. I work in the Office of Disability Employment Policy. So I'll go ahead and just give you a quick overview of our office. So the Office of Disability Employment Policy is the only non-regulatory federal agency in the Department of Labor that promotes policies and coordinates with employers and all levels of government to increase workplace success for people with disabilities. Our mission, again, is to develop and influence policies and practices that increase the number and quality of employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And our approach, or how we do that, is by driving systems and practice change. And that's really through sharing information. So this is doing presentations like this where we share data and advice is very much within our mission and our approach to encouraging people to pursue accessibility careers and making society more inclusive to people with disabilities broadly. And by the way, as we're talking about accessibility careers, ODEP is a great place to work. We have about 50 to 60 people in our office, and we are growing. Every budget or every annual budget, we get more funds for more full-time staff. And we have a variety of jobs that you could hold in our office. I'm essentially a data scientist, and we are hiring more data scientists if you're interested in research and evaluation. Most of my colleagues are policy analysts, and so they advise other federal agencies, state and local governments, and private sector employers, and community groups on developing inclusive policies in the workplace. And then, of course, we also have functions that are cross-cutting, like a public affairs team and a human resources team. So it's a really great place to work. And if anyone's more curious about what it's like to work specifically at ODEP, my office, I would be happy to answer that question. And I'm sure that the office would be happy to hire people who have been interested in this subject and been participating in things like Teach Access. Okay, so I wanted to make 3 points today in my talk. And they are, first, why does accessibility matter to people with disabilities, and how do we know? What sorts of jobs are accessibility careers? So what sorts of jobs are important towards advancing disability inclusion in society? My spoiler alert is that that's a trick question. I believe that truly any job has an accessibility component to it. And if you're looking to make the world more inclusive, it doesn't really matter what your career is, you will be able to find ways to affect that kind of change in your professional and personal life. And then lastly, what tools are out there? So how can I or you inform myself about necessary skills and the job market outlook for the careers that I'm interested in, whether they relate to accessibility explicitly or not. Okay. So going back to that first question, why does accessibility matter? I'm certain that I actually don't need to convince anybody here that it does, but I wanted to present some interesting recent research anyways. Because that's my wheelhouse, research and evaluation. So this actually was released this week, and it's been getting a lot of attention. This recent economic study that shows how people with disabilities are actually disproportionately benefiting from the rapid recovery from the initial economic contraction that was caused by the pandemic. So I'm not going to talk too much about this figure, but basically what it's depicting is how the employment rate among people with disabilities has actually surpassed what the rate was before the pandemic, whereas among people without disabilities, it's kind of holding steady. It's kind of returned to pre-pandemic levels. But it turns out that workers with disabilities have actually gained or increased in their employment rates since before 2020. And that's actually attributed to telework especially. So the ability to not just have telework being a reasonable accommodation that only people with disabilities typically would have access to in a workplace, but that telework and remote work becoming ubiquitous in a lot of, not all jobs, but a significant portion of them in our economy has made a lot of different workplaces much more accessible to people with disabilities that wouldn't have been before. And so, that's what we see as one of the silver linings, I guess you could say, of the pandemic and disability employment. However, we do know that there are gaps in access to internet and the digital economy. This is research that our team did at ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy. The top line finding is that disabled adults, especially those of lower income, have significantly lower rates of access to home internet service, so paying for internet at home, compared with similar adults without disabilities. What's more is that even among people who have internet at home, disabled people are less likely to be internet users. So that's true whether you have like a more basic type of home internet, like a mobile, satellite, or dial-up type internet, or high-speed broadband internet, so cable, DSL, or fiber. And of course, the gap, if you are looking across the population, is even greater. We're talking about a 20 percentage point difference by disability status. People with disabilities use internet at home at a rate 20% lower than people without disabilities. What this doesn't really tell us, of course, is the full story. So why is there this gap? I don't have evidence about that, but I would hypothesize that it has to do with the accessibility of the internet itself and the types of goods and services and activities that you can perform online. And so that's where, things like web accessibility and inclusive design of online services is a tremendous potential to advance disability inclusion. So I just wanted to motivate my talk a little bit. But again, like I said, I'm sure that we've already all agreed on these points before I even started talking. So I'll kind of transition into more of the meat of this talk, which is what are some of the jobs that we really need to see more accessibility champions in, and what is the job outlook in those fields. So this is a list that I had some help putting together. This is my first ask of you as a group. So I'll read out all of these occupation titles. But what I'm really curious about while I'm talking is if there's a career that you are interested in, that you see an accessibility role in that isn't on this list, because there will be like an interactive demo part, and we can explore data and career outlooks related to any of the careers of your interest if you put them in the chat now, and then we'll come back to that. So here's just like a working list, and obviously not exhaustive, of some of the jobs that we identified where accessibility champions could really make a difference. So the first is this broad category of software and web developers, programmers, and testers. And within that, that would include computer programmers, software developers, software quality assurance analysts and testers, web developers, and web and digital interface designers. Other types of occupations that we identified in this group were computer hardware engineers, special education teachers, rehabilitation counselors, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, computer and information systems managers, and human resources specialists. So I will define each of these a little bit more as I go on. But again, I really encourage you to put in the chat any other types of careers that you've been looking at, or occupations that you've been looking at, that would extend this list. Love to know what you all are thinking. Okay, so back to this subject of job outlook. Like, what does that really mean? And what can we really know from trends and statistics and predictions and projections? So the point that I want to make on this slide is basically a disclaimer to all of the rest of the data and statistics that I'm about to present. So obviously there's always a lot of news coverage about the data set that I'm about to present, because people are always really curious about what the fastest growing careers are in the country, or like what fast growing industries are. Most of the jobs that I just presented would be considered to be fast growing careers. But what does a projection, like how much of a grain of salt should you take when you're thinking about that kind of reporting, or like reading things online about job openings and job growth? The answer is you should take it with a huge grain of salt, of course. Our economy is incredibly unpredictable. And so, I mean, the point I'm trying to make here is that if you look at these different points in time, so like say 2001, when, well, I guess like that was like the end of the dot-com boom or bust. And from 2001 to 2008, leading up to the Great Recession, the outlook was really great in terms of the economy's growth and the number of jobs. And I can tell you that like when this data set was projecting forward from 2007, it certainly wasn't predicting that there was going to be a recession from 2008 to 2011. And I think this chart illustrates that, in that if we look forward to, this period between 2019 and 2021, there are two projections that are depicted. One is this yellow dashed line that shows like a very slow but steady increase to 166 million jobs by 2031. And then what it also shows is how the pandemic and the recession that was sparked by the pandemic changed the shape of that curve, and how quickly the Bureau of Labor Statistics is now projecting that we'll get to 166 million jobs by 2031. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is whatever numbers that I'm presenting, I really don't know if they're going to come true or not. And you can read the methodology about, and I can give more detail about the justification for the predictions that are being made about the specific industries and occupations that I'm about to speak about. But yeah, I don't know. I think truly, I don't think you should use these to base your decisions on what type of career to go into. But rather, I think, you can use it as a tool to think about what kind of education and what kind of skills do I want to pick up that'll open up the most doors for me in the future and give me an opportunity to work in something related to accessibility. So, okay, I think that was kind of a longer soapbox than I planned. But I feel like it's really important to preface data with lots of caveats and realism. So another finding from this data that this employment projections data that gets a lot of attention is this one, which is that STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math occupations are projected to grow much faster than average in the next 10 years. So between now and 2031. And what's more, they're expected to have nearly double the annual wages compared with other occupations. So this type of, obviously this type of figure is basically telling us that we should expect that a lot of job opportunities and well-paying jobs that offer a path to a stable, at least middle-class lifestyle are going to be in STEM. And I assume that many of you are going to be interested in STEM occupations. And so this is like a very optimistic outlook. Again, of course, like these projections were made before this year. And like, we couldn't have predicted that the tech industry this year would have kind of imploded. It's really impossible to predict the future, but generally speaking, given like the way that different technologies are maturing and how automation and data science are changing the way many industries are working, the Bureau of Labor Statistics continues to expect that STEM occupations will grow rapidly in the future. So what is useful for you all? Why does the Bureau of Labor Statistics publish this data, and how can you make it work for you? So where can you find information about job growth and essential skills for your career of choice, whatever that may be? Today, I wanted to present about 2 data sources / databases that are funded by the Department of Labor. The first is the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Projections Program, which I was just discussing some of the data from that previously. They develop information about the labor market for the nation as a whole for 10 years in the future. The second is even more practical, in my opinion, which is the Employment and Training Administration's Occupational Information Network, which we also refer to as ONET. So it describes job requirements and worker attributes, as well as the content and context of work. So again, I would love to know in the chat, among those of you, how many of you have heard of one or both of these data sources, or have just, let me know, like, what is your level of familiarity with these tools and data sources before this talk today? Okay, so, and then what I'm going to do for the next like 10 slides or so is I'm going to give you examples of the kind of information that you can glean from these 2 data sources. And then we can think about like how that might inform you as you prepare to find a job in whatever it is your career of choice. And then I'm going to move into that interactive portion where I'm going to actually open up these websites and the data sources related. And then we can poke around and kind of like look through how would I actually use this to answer the specific questions that I have or that you have. So going back to that list that I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to run through it and show you like the type of information that's available in these data sources. So consider if you are looking for information about an occupation as a computer programmer. So briefly, this is an occupation where a typical expectation would be that you modify software improvements, programs to improve performance, test software performance, and collaborate with others to resolve information technology issues. So that's your first data point. Like, this is how the Bureau of Labor Statistics would describe this occupation. And that will be helpful, that will be helpful in terms of accessing any of the information. You need to first figure out like what is the way that the Bureau of Labor Statistics refers to the career or groups of jobs that you're interested in. They help also, the tools in the online database will help too, in that it leads into the second bullet point. Obviously, there are a lot of different job titles that are floating out there when you're actually searching for a job, looking through LinkedIn, looking through a job board. So they also gather common reported job titles that would fall under this broader category of computer programmers. So I guess some of those would be analyst, programmer, application programmer, analyst, computer programmer, and so on. And they also, I think this is of course very important, they also report what the median annual earnings are today among people of that occupation. There's a lot that, there's a lot of variables that go into earnings, right? Like cost of living, and your earnings or your income, your wage and salary really depends on what metropolitan area you live in. It depends on how much experience you have, and it depends on how much you work in some cases. Some jobs might have a higher rate of people who work part-time. And earnings don't include things like benefits. So not like the value of your healthcare package or 401k matching, like those types of things wouldn't be included in this number. So that's important to keep in mind as you're kind of like using earnings as a data point to inform your decisions about the jobs that you're interested in. So like with all of that said, I would recommend like not looking at different occupations and then comparing their median earnings to inform like which one offers the best earning potential for you. Because I might also present about a different occupation that has a much higher median earning than $93,000 a year, but that might be because you need to have typically like 10 to 15 years of experience to even have that occupation in the first place. Or like going to my next point, these different jobs have a different mix of educational attainments. So I guess 88% of new hires who are computer programmers have at least a bachelor's degree before they get into that. So that's just another data point that you might want to consider. I'm assuming that all of you are at least in a 2-year associate's program or a 4-year bachelor's, if not also a graduate program. But let me know if I'm wrong in the chat. So this is sort of like the big reveal. So this computer programmers group is projected to actually decrease in employment between last year and 2031. So falling about 10 percentage points from 174,000 total jobs in the economy, including self-employed, to 157,000. So again, like what do these projections really tell us? Not a lot, but the underlying assumptions that BLS made that got us to this downward trend is maybe interesting. So I'll show you where you can find the assumptions that were made and the rationale for why this field is projected to decrease. In this particular instance, I believe it's because this isn't a job that they think is going to be mostly automated in the future. And so, so this is where it gets kind of fuzzy, right? Because like I have a STEM background and I can't tell you what the difference is between who's classified as a computer programmer and who's classified as a software developer, which is my the next job group that I'm going to present about. So software developers are people that research, design, and develop computer and network software or specialized utility programs. Other similar job titles in this category might be application developer, application integration engineer, developer, infrastructure engineer, etc. Typical median annual earnings were 121,000 last year. And most of these occupations require a 4-year bachelor's degree, but some do not. So this one, even though I cannot tell you what the difference is really between a software developer and a computer programmer, is projected to grow by 26% between last year and 2031. And it's also a much larger group of jobs, I think. So we're talking about on the order of 1.4 million to 1.8 million total jobs in the economy. So I'm going to start moving faster because there are a lot of other occupations that I just included in this slide, but then we're going to go into the interactive part, and I want to hear what occupations you want to dig into if I have not included them in this slide deck already. So another one is software quality assurance analysts and testers, people who develop and execute software tests to identify software problems and their causes. 50% of these new hires need at least a bachelor's degree. And they're also projected to grow by 21% by 2031. Another group we looked at is web developers. So people who write supporting code for web applications or websites. Employment in web development is projected to grow by 30% by 2031. Web and digital interface designers, so people who design digital user interfaces or websites, again, typically require a 4-year bachelor's degree. This group is expected to grow by 16% by 2031. Note that it's a smaller subset. We're talking on the order of 100,000 jobs here, or occupations that fall into this category. Another occupation I listed earlier was computer hardware engineers. So people who research, design, develop, or test computer or computer-related equipment for commercial, industrial, military, or scientific use. Most of these occupations require a 4-year bachelor's degree. And this one is projected to grow more slightly. And also, again, because it's a smaller job category, we're talking, it's a 5% increase between 2021 and 2031. And that amounts to, in magnitude, about 4,000 jobs. Okay, so kind of moving away from STEM for a second, another occupation we wanted to look at was special education teachers. So these are people who teach academic, social, and life skills to secondary school students with learning, emotional, and physical disabilities. And I wanted to include this too, because the point I made earlier is that all jobs are accessibility jobs. This is another way that you can support young adults with disabilities in creating an inclusive environment. So most of these occupations also require a 4-year bachelor's degree. And this field is expected to grow by 4% by 2031. Another somewhat related job category is rehabilitation counselors. So these people counsel individuals to maximize the independence and employability of persons coping with personal, social, and vocational difficulties. Many of these jobs also require a 4-year bachelor's degree. And this job group is expected to grow by 11% by 2031. Okay, another job group that is similar to rehabilitation counselors. So occupational therapists assess, plan, and organize rehabilitative programs that help build or restore vocational, homemaking, and daily living skills. This is a job that requires graduate school typically. So if this is something that you want to specialize in, based on this description, you might find that you would need to pursue further higher education and specialized training to get into this field. This is a field that's expected to grow by 14% by 2031. Another job group is speech language pathologists, people who assess and treat persons with speech, language, voice, and fluency disorders. Again, this is a field that requires more specialization beyond a bachelor's degree, and it's projected to grow by 21% by 2031. Okay, and then another group is computer and information systems managers. These occupations plan, direct, or coordinate activities in such fields as electronic data processing, information systems, systems analysis, and computer programming. You'll note that the annual earnings are quite high. So let's go back to that point that I made earlier, that we're going we're going to see a lot of different occupation groups, and there's no one-to-one comparison between them. And that's because you would imagine that this is a group, if you are a manager, you probably have a lot more work experience. And probably a lot more domain expertise too, compared with someone who's coming in at the entry level. So even though this group of occupations also only requires a 4-year bachelor's degree, so the same level of education expected of a computer programmer or a software developer, the median annual earnings are higher because the composition of the people that are included in this occupation is different. They're probably older and have more job experience. Nevertheless, that is perhaps an occupation you might want to grow towards in the midpoint of your career. And this is a job group that's expected to grow by 16% by 2031. Okay, I think this is the last one I'm just going to run through. So human resources specialists. I mentioned earlier that my office, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, we hire human resources specialists who are experts in job accommodations and making our specific workplace more inclusive to people with disabilities. I would imagine that most employers have similar roles, and this is definitely an opportunity that if you wanted to make one specific workplace more accessible. I personally believe that every office needs someone who's an expert in employee relationships related to making it safe and private to ask for job accommodations and get the tools that you need in order to perform your job successfully. So I think human resources specialists have a huge role to play in creating an inclusive world. And these people recruit, screen, interview, or place individuals within an organization. This is a field that's expected to grow by 8% by 2031. Okay, and then I didn't pull the data for these, but these are just some other occupations that I found by clicking around that BLS provides data on. The Bureau of Labor Statistics provides data on that probably also particularly need accessibility champions. So I was thinking of human factors engineers and ergonomists, video game designers, graphic designers, architects, robotics engineers, and equal opportunity representatives and officers. So let me know in the chat if you want me to pull some of the same data that I was just presenting earlier about any one of these specific careers. So that's the last part of my formal presentation. I think the number one thing I want you to take away is that every career is an accessibility career. So no matter where you go in your life, you can always be an advocate for making the places that you work and the places that you work more accessible and inclusive. And you can always be an advocate in your community and your network for the specific needs that need to be met to make workplaces and society at large more inclusive. So that's my call to action for you. And it is my everyday call to action as well. So good luck. Please keep in touch with us at the Office of Disability Employment Policy. I'm going to include the email address of my supervisor named Sabi Swick. And she would be a fabulous resource for any of you if you're interested in future statistics about disability employment, because she has a much broader role in our organization than I do. And she's also hiring. Okay. So
Thanks for the call out. This was awesome. And that presentation was really incredible. Are there any questions in the chat that we can have Amy answer? I know you addressed some of them while we were going, of just things that they were interested in. I'm sure it will be a great resource to also have Savi's email as well. So definitely take advantage of it if you are interested in a role, especially if they're hiring already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So I'm seeing game design and development. Awesome. Social media and marketing, of course. Retail and entertainment sectors. Okay, and then what does your data indicate about remote work opportunities in the digital accessibility space? Okay, yes, that's an interesting question. I'll have to think about how I want to answer that. Okay, and then it sounds like some people were aware of the data sources I was talking about and others were not. So I think I only want to take about 8 to 10 more minutes of this presentation. Can you still see my screen?
No, we can't anymore.
Oh, okay, let me reshare
Oh,
then.
now we can. Now we
Oh,
can.
you can. Okay. You can see this?
Yes, I see every career is an accessibility career.
Okay. Let me move some stuff around. So the first, I think I'm going to start with the data from the employment projections data product or program. So let's see, let me show you what I would do if I wanted to find information about social media and marketing careers using this data set. So I'm going to share this too. I can't promise that this Excel document is terribly accessible. Unfortunately, this is what is published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is the underlying, when you see reports that are oh, these are the fastest solar power installers, is the fastest growing job group in the country or whatever. This is the data source that comes from. So
should we be seeing, right now we're just seeing the presentation.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you were going to share the Excel.
Yeah. Let me see if I can share my whole screen. I'm just going to try again.
Also, no big deal if we just need to add a little visual description for the Excel, because sometimes Excel documents are not the best to read. Also, you can zoom in to your screen if anybody needs the extra zoom.
Sure. Thank you. So our table of contents for this data source, I'm going to click through a few of them pretty quickly, but why don't we start with, this one, table 1.2, employment by detailed occupation. So let me zoom in just a little bit more. I'm going to filter this. Oh, I cannot filter this. Let me see. Sorry, I don't have a Word subscription. So this is the free version of Word where you can't actually do anything. But let's see if social media comes up. Okay, how about marketing? Okay, well, let's see. So I think that I would guess if we're thinking about social media and marketing, that it would probably fall under something like advertising, or sorry, marketing and sales managers. Okay, managers though. So yeah, I guess marketing would probably be falling under this group. So market research analysts and marketing specialists. Oh, let me see if I can filter this. Oh, okay. This is what I get for trying to use free Excel. Anyways, I don't want to spend too long on this, but basically it's organized so that you can find the employment that was observed in 2021. And then this is the projected employment in the next column, column E, for employment in 2031. And the percent change associated with the difference in those two numbers is in column I. Another one that I think is interesting. So in this same table, so it's the same, let's see. Okay, so this is another really interesting table, I think. I'm going to zoom in. It's the same list of occupations. So if you were interested in being a marketing specialist, that would also show up in this column. There's over 1,000 occupations in this list. And it also includes information about median annual wages in 2021. Remember the grain of salt that I was discussing before. Typical education needed for entry, typical work experience levels in that occupation, and then typical on-the-job training. So I guess some examples of, okay, so this is sort of a measure of the degree of specialization that's associated with a certain occupation. The last thing there was one other thing I wanted to show you all about this data set, or just call out, because I know there's a lot of information here and kind of hard to navigate. So this table is table 112, factors affecting occupational utilization. So this is basically when I was saying that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has to describe the assumptions that they made in order to make predictions about future job growth. This is where you can find information about what is the specific assumption that they made. So again, there's over 1,000 rows in this sheet corresponding to different occupations. And if you go all the way to the right-hand side, we have this really interesting like explanation of why they like, what is it about, like what macroeconomic like assumption are they making about this occupation? So I guess, for example, let's see. What would be an interesting one? Well, anyways, so yeah, so we're looking at things like changes in productivity due to, so for example, they think that this field, whatever one it is, automation basically is going to reduce the number of people that are associated with this occupation. They're also, I guess, so this is like an interesting, another interesting different one. So it's like there's a sourcing change. They're expecting that fewer people will be associated with this occupation as people outsource like human resources functions. So this is sort of like trying to just add a little bit more reason to the black box of like, why do you think this specific career is going to decrease by 15% in the next, or increase in the next 10 years? So that's the first resource I want to share. And that, again, that comes from the employment projections data program at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So let me go back and share my screen again. The other thing I wanted to share is ONET, which I know someone, at least one person said that they are already familiar with. Okay, so we're going back to my browser. Here is ONET. So the homepage for ONET looks like this. I would say, like, if you already have an occupation in mind that you want to learn about, you would probably start here. So if you were interested in being a marketing specialist, you would start with the occupation keyword, bring you to this page. Some of the information that I was describing it comes straight from here. So a description of what people typically do in these occupations, researching conditions in local, regional, national, or online markets, sample of reported job titles. This might be helpful if you want to be looking on job boards and LinkedIn for specific jobs. And then there's just a wealth of information about this occupation. In terms of more detail about the types of tasks that you might do in this job, I would say if you are trying to tailor a resume for this job, this list of tasks would be a really great source for keywords to describe things that you've done in class for projects or in internships. If you can match these phrases and give evidence for how you have experience in these, probably make it a lot easier for your resume to stand out for a marketing specialist job. So this is a resource, plagiarize this basically to make your resume more attractive. Again, technology skills. So these are, and they conduct a lot of data analysis or data collection to gather this information. So technology skills. Again, if you are wanting to tailor your resume, you might take this as a cue that these are some of the technology skills that you might want to list on your resume. And then of course, also, if some of these things are things you haven't heard of before, or like haven't had the chance to get training on, you might want to focus there. Let's see. And then there actually is like what I said about training and credentials. I think this section is more the training and credentials, and helping you find training is definitely especially related to like the trades industries, where a credential or a certification might be especially important. Okay, some educational information. And then the one other thing I wanted to show about ONET is you can also go backwards. So say like you have a set of skills that you're proud of and you want to apply them. I'm turning into a broken record, but every career is an accessibility career. So if there is a type of like skill or like job function that you are really passionate about and you're not sure like what industry or what field to apply that in, you can also start by thinking about what are the skills and that I like, or like the skills and technologies that I like working with, and what types of jobs are those skills most common in. So like, let's say you can go to this like hot technologies section. And so like we'll go like backwards. Like what are the technologies that you like working with? And then what are the careers associated with that? So I'm just going to choose one at random. I don't know, don't know what most of these things are. I studied engineering in school. So I actually learned a lot about how to use computer aided design software when I was in engineering school. Let's say I wanted to figure out like what types of jobs are associated with it. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the top ones are related to engineering. And so this is how you might like, if you are not sure, like what is as I said, like what is the difference between a computer programmer and a software developer? Like this might be the way that you actually narrow down first based on your skills and abilities, what occupations you want to look more closely into. So let me check the chat one more time. This is pretty much the end of my formal presentation. So Leslie and Sam, if I have time to answer a couple more questions, I can get it.
That would be great. I know that there was just a lot of interest in remote work, and you may not have the data yet, but I think just to kick off that conversation, I think in a post-COVID world, jobs across the board, whether accessibility or not, have new features where you can see what remote positions are available. And then even when you are working, there's definitely flexibility into that work environment. And I think companies across the board are a lot more understanding of accommodations or requesting specific work environments based on your needs. So I think just being upfront about what you're looking for is really essential. But Amy, I'm curious if there's anything you've seen in your own work that speaks to more of that remote work environment.
Yeah, so I think like from a national data point of view, there's a lot of unanswered questions about that. I don't think anybody is collecting data from employers about how they like their willingness to offer remote work in the future. And so I don't know that there's data being collected to project how many job openings in the future will be remote specifically. Sam, I think I mean, I would just say I agree with your point that it's good. I think it's just going to depend on the employer, the extent to like what kind of policies they're going to offer. And that's, I mean, like what I've observed anecdotally among my friends is that especially in the private sector, like that's just like really in flux. Like I have friends who have been hybrid or remote for the last 2.5 years and are now being asked to come back into the office. Some even like nearly full time, and with, maybe a couple months notice. So I would say that is like, if remote work is something that you're interested in, I think that's something that you should be upfront about when you're job searching, and also look specifically for postings that mention that. And then like to the extent that you think that being able to work remotely would help, like say you have transportation challenges to getting to work because you don't have a good public transportation system, or your prospective employer's office is just like in a transit desert. To the extent that you think you can make an argument that remote work would be a job accommodation that would help you do your job more effectively, we have resources for that. So I'll put in a link in the chat for the Job Accommodations Network, which is something you may or may not have heard about. But that's a free resource that the Department of Labor funds that advises job seekers on what their rights are related to asking for job accommodations at work. And remote work is one of those job accommodations that's in that menu of options, and how to ask your employer about that. And they also have information that you can share with your employer about the benefits of things like remote work, if that is something that would help convince them that it would be valuable to let you be a remote worker, or also because it is their legal obligation to make their workplace inclusive to people with different needs. Let's see. Is there anything anybody else wants to add about remote work in the future, and definitely specifically in the accessibility space?
I think that was great, but if anyone else has any other last questions, feel free to come off mute. I know that you talked about a lot of different accessibility related jobs that are in demand. To answer your question, Roshan, especially to recent graduates and new graduates too. And the resources you provided were super useful too, and sort of, again, aligning your interests in the accessibility space with perhaps what roles are more suited to your expertise or your experiences thus far. So I think you did a great job of answering that throughout. I think it's always the answer of it depends based on the role in the industry as well. Any other questions before we pass it back to Leslie? Okay, well, Amy, thank you again on behalf of Teach Access for sharing all of these really useful resources. Always great to see data being used in the accessibility space because it's very few and far between. So just, again, to have your decisions rooted in data is only going to be a value add. So thank you for all of your help. It was great to meet you.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, Leslie, back to you.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know that we have had so much interest in the Teach Access Career Development Series that we have added 2 new sessions. So after on December 2nd, so in 2 weeks from today, we will bring on board Lex Gillette from the Intel team. And besides just being a part of the Intel team, I'm going to share his website with you because so you can learn more about Lex and all the work he does. So we're very excited to have him. And then the following week, this Friday, December 9th, we are going to have our second new session, which will be with the Senior Manager for Diversity Strategy Experience and Hiring at Verizon. So we have 2 more great sessions that will be added. So I'll be sharing more information again through email. So keep an eye out for that. But again, we'll have Lex Gillette from Intel on December 2nd and Cameron Day from Verizon on December 9th. So does anyone else have any last questions or thoughts? Yeah, as Kate added in the chat, our industry partners are so excited to be able to connect with you all and share. So we definitely hope that you'll join us in December. So, and thank you for coming today. And thank you so much to Amy.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.